As we're all aware how difficult it is for an international student to find jobs, especially a sponsored one, on that note, we welcome you to our reflections and next steps for international students session as part of our Becoming a Leeds Graduate series. We're joined by Jenna and Sean from the International Student Office and Student Visa Advice, who will be talking about the options available for international students. If you have any questions for them as we go, please put them in the chat. It is being moderated by my colleague Abhinav, who will also be making sure that all of the questions are being answered. And there will also be an opportunity for you to ask any questions at the end of the session. I'll now hand over to Jenna and we can commence the session.
Thanks very much, Tanya, and welcome to everyone joining us today. It's really nice to have this chance to be with you this afternoon. Today's session is actually going to be in two parts. So I'm going to lead us through part one, which is really just an opportunity to pause and reflect on some of the experiences that you've had in your years at Leeds as you think of moving on to your next step. And then in part two, Sean is going to present about post-study work options. I'm Jenna, and I work currently as a project manager in our international student office, and Sean is the student visa advice manager in our student visa advice team. Sean's relatively new to the university. I've been here for about nearly 7 years now, and my role in the International Student Office has been different over the years, but has included organising the welcome and orientation programmes that hopefully some of you found helpful when you arrived, as well as our global community activities and other intercultural activities that different teams run around the university. And I also have some role in providing training and support for staff in the areas of international student experience and support. So yeah, it's really nice to be here today. I'm going to lead us through in this part one is just, as I said, an opportunity to take a bit of time, not too much time, but just to kind of stop and think and reflect about what's happened. Because if you're anything like me, the last few years will have been very busy, a lot of change, a lot of different stuff to cope with, and we'll all have had to do new things or do the same things in different ways or cope with quite a lot of challenges. And what I've found helpful recently is actually just taking a bit of time to stop and think about what that's been like, what I've achieved, what people I've worked with have achieved, what I've kind of starting to learn from those experiences, and how that might help me in the future. And when I was invited to do this session, it made me think that actually that was quite similar to my own experience quite some years ago now when I went to study for my master's for 2 years as an international student. It was a very big period of change. It was a very exciting period, a very challenging period, but one that I kind of came back to the UK afterwards thinking, right, what next? with kind of no idea. And you know, that is a big period of change. And so it's really good what I've learned since to take some time just to stop and think and reflect whenever you're going through a big period of change or you're looking forward to something new. The format of part one today is really, I'm just going to ask some questions and talk a little bit about some ideas that could help with prompting some thinking. And they're going to be a few little activities where I'm just going to ask you to do some reflection on your own. So there might just be 3 or 4 minutes where I just ask you to think about something. So you might want to use a pen or a paper to write down some notes as you're doing the little reflections, or you could use a screen or a phone if that's what you've got with you today. And then while we won't have a big discussion about what you've written, there will be an opportunity to post some comments in the chat, or if there's not too many of us, so if people want to come on the mic and share something that they've thought about in the reflective activities, then I think we could do that with the numbers of people that we've got today. So that's what to expect from this first. It'll be up to about 2:30, no longer than that, and then we'll hear from Sean. So the first thing I thought it would be really good to think about is just all of the things that you have achieved during your time at Leeds. And I've chosen these pictures on the slides of, you probably recognise the bunting flags that that always live outside the student union. You've probably seen more of it around the UK recently because of the Platinum Jubilee, but I've always found it quite strange that those flags are up outside the union all year round, every day, because normally they're about celebration, a special occasion. But actually it made me think, because I would walk underneath this bunting every day, that it is actually important to celebrate our everyday achievements, especially during times maybe that didn't feel so great or felt quite difficult. And as I said, there have been so many extra challenges to deal with during the pandemic, as well as all the many big and small things that we might achieve in our daily lives when we're living in a new place or getting used to a new learning environment and doing the challenge of our degree. So I've chosen the second picture because it's still got the "please keep a safe distance" poster. So you've achieved so much by choosing to come and study in a different country, possibly in a second language. Maybe you've been here before, maybe you hadn't. Maybe you were studying a new subject that you haven't done before. And that's always difficult, but you've done it even more at a difficult time during a global pandemic where there was so much uncertainty, so much change, you know, and we know that this has been a time that's been particularly challenging for international students, working with travel regulations and restrictions and testing and all the different things that people needed to understand and keep track of. I've put some little pictures at the bottom of the slide as well to just remind you of all the little things perhaps that you've got used to now that you don't even have to think about anymore because they've just become something really normal. But take a little bit of time now for reflection number one. I'm going to give us 3 minutes, and I'd like you to try and think back to when you first arrived in Leeds, whenever that was, and just list as many things as possible that you can think of that you've achieved during your time in Leeds. And that could include even the really small stuff at the beginning, like, I don't know, figuring out where to buy things, how to understand the new currency, dealing with the weather, through to kind of making relationships, things maybe that you've achieved in your studies or outside of your studies, and also maybe challenges that you've overcome. So I'm going to ask you three minutes just to list all the things that you can think of, big and small. And then maybe towards the end, think of one thing that feels quite significant to you, if there's something that you notice from the list. So I'm going to time for 3 minutes. You can just do that on your own, and then we'll see if anyone wants to share something that they wrote. Okay, I'm going to set the timer. It's going to be quiet. Okay, that was 3 minutes. That went quite fast, didn't it? So hopefully you came up with a good list of things that that you've achieved, big or small, in the last year or 3 years, or longer. Now, have a look down your list and think: is there anything there that feels particularly significant to you? So I'd like to invite, if there is anyone that just wants to share something that stuck out as significant to them, you could either post something in the chat, or if you want to come on the microphone, you're welcome to quickly tell us.
Hi.
Oh, hello.
I want to share some outcomes I learned from the last year. I think the most important things is the two. The first one is the intercultural studies. Because of the different country I came from, I saw the weather here is very changeable, and then also the pop football culture and people greeting with the how are you, love, sweetie, and so on. And the other things is about the different mode of study. I have to be self-disciplined, self-motivated, and have to be have the critical thinking. And this kind of the quality, I think, will be very helpful in the future.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So there was a lot of different stuff there, wasn't there? There was kind of like academic achievements, there was day-to-day life achievements, and also thinking about skills that you might have developed from all of those kind of activities. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody else want to share something, either in the chat or on the mic?
I made a lot of friends here, and I kind of feel that I am multicultural now. That is the reason why I chose to came to UK, and it occurred, and I achieved it, I guess. And regarding my academics, the course that I am currently, the course that I am doing, and the project that I am really working right now, is giving me a lot of skills that is needed in the industry level, that is going to be useful in the industry in the future. So I'm really helpful. I think it is really helpful, and those are the things that the skill set that I have achieved right now, and I think it will be useful in the future, in the near future.
That's great to hear. Thank you very much for sharing that. So again, there's that mixture of the kind of academic skills, there's also that broader cultural experience that you've had from the time here. So I'm glad to hear that it's brought you the things that you hoped for there. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide, which is thinking about sort of some of that cultural experience that you've gained. So some of you might have attended an international orientation session when you first arrived. And in this session, we talk about quite a widely used framework for understanding cultural transition, which is called the 5 R's of culture change. And it was developed by a researcher called Kate Barrado. And these are sort of 5 changes that can be significant for us when we move across cultures. And my colleagues and I, we think it's a really useful model because it helps us to think about kind of why certain changes affect us, how we might respond, and what can help. So that might include things like adapting your daily routines. So something even as simple as eating different food at a different time of day, or if you practice a faith, maybe finding a different way of timing and schedule for praying in different places throughout the day. Also things like changing our roles. So you might have come here and taken on a new role of a student, or perhaps an international student. You might have taken on some leadership roles, but you might also be looking to move forward into a new role in future. There's also changes in our relationships, so how our relationships change with the people that we get to know and build relationships with here. Also how we might end up feeling closer or more distant at different times from people at home. And then there's ideas about how we react to new situations, but also how people react to us. So that can be a big one in terms of our cultural insight, you know, how we do something that's would be kind of quite usual in a familiar scenario, and we get a different kind of reaction in a new context. And that can be a really good way of learning about cultural difference, like noticing when different things cause different reactions in the new environment. And of course, all of these changes can make us feel differently about ourselves as well. So you might have started to notice that you've enjoyed certain aspects of the lifestyle in the UK, maybe that you weren't aware of or didn't know that you would enjoy. But you might also have realised that certain aspects of your life from home or your values were really important to you, but you wouldn't have had a chance to know that if you hadn't gone somewhere different. So that was certainly the case for me when I was an international student. So I think it's quite interesting to return to this model, not just when you're in a new place, but actually to reflect on the experiences that you've had, and also to think about the changes ahead, whether you're going to return to your home country, whether you're staying in Leeds in the UK, or perhaps moving somewhere else completely new. This is a really good model for thinking about sort of like what changed, you know, what can change, what helps you cope with those changes, and what you kind of learn from that experience that will help you in the future. So I think I'm just going to ask you to do another little reflection now. Maybe we'll do 2 minutes for this one. If you just think about some of the biggest changes that you experienced during your time in Leeds, and what actually helped you to cope with those changes, and what do you want to remember about that as you look forward to experiencing more changes in the future? I think that's really good when you get into a new change environment to think, what has helped me when I coped with change in the past? So I just like you to spend two minutes thinking, what was some of the most significant change that you coped with in this time in Leeds? What helped you cope with that change, and what do you want to remember about that for the future? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes on that. You might just want to write some things or just think about it. So it's going to be another little quiet period. Okay, that's our 2 minutes. So I'm going to invite again, if we've got another brave person who either wants to post something in the chat or come on the microphone and talk about one thing that you'd like to remember for the future when you're experiencing the next period of change, whether that's a culture change or some other change of your job, change of circumstances. Any advice to your future self?
Hi, me again.
Yeah,
I would love to share my biggest change is the intercultural mindset. At first, I had the stereotype of different people from different race, and after living with my flatmate who is from different countries, I found that it's very important to learn it's very important to not to judge at first, because everyone have their rules, and we need to observe first and then to fitting into different cultures, and then you can talk about something. This can help you to avoid the conflict a lot.
That's really interesting, thank you. So it sounded like actually having that relationship with somebody and being kind of curious and open was helpful for you in dealing with that new situation. And yeah, that's really nice to hear. Yeah, so I think it's a really good practice to notice important things have changed and how they might affect us. And it sounds really positive that you were able to go from something where you might have felt, oh, I'm stereotyping in that situation, but you've actually reflected on it and you've moved beyond that feeling, and you've actually built new relationships and new understanding. So your ability to do that is really, really important. And that will come into what I'm going to say in the next few slides as well. Before we move on to that, though, I just wanted to say a little bit about reverse culture shock, because we talked a little bit about, you know, all the changes you might have experienced when you got here and what helped you to cope with those. If you are going to be returning to a familiar home country or somewhere you've lived before after graduating from Leeds, it is quite normal to experience quite another period of change and transition. I know for me, actually, I had never heard the term reverse culture shock when I moved back to the UK after being an international student, and I think it affected me worse than when I went away in the first place, because you think it's going to be all familiar and you don't expect it to be strange or difficult. You know, it can make you feel a bit unsettled for a time, but the general advice really is not to worry too much about it, just to be aware that it can happen, and if you start to feel a bit unsettled, to kind of notice what's changing and be in touch with your feelings. But do remember what helped you when you first got here as well. So it might have been things like finding a routine, remaining curious, seeking out the positives of whatever's happening, connecting with people and reflecting on your experiences. So just remember, if that is the situation for you, whether you're going to a new place or a familiar one, that those kind of changes and unsettling feelings can come, but try not to worry too much about it. And I've put a link on the slide to some other useful advice about reverse culture shock from UKISA, which is UK Council for International Student Affairs. And we've heard a little bit about people feeling that they have developed some sort of cultural insight or experience from their time in Leeds, and that's really good to hear. You might feel like you've learned some things about culture, about cultural difference, perhaps about your own culture and values. It sounds like we've heard about people learning things about building relationships and communication. Yeah, and these experiences of cultural difference can really help us recognise things about our own cultural background that we might have taken for granted. So that's been really interesting for me. One of the reasons why I love my job is an opportunity every day to understand what's weird about Britain and British culture by interacting with people who are experiencing it new. I love that. I find it really interesting, and it really helped with my kind of awareness of what other people might find confusing or difficult about living here. So you might continue to learn more things as you reflect back on your own experiences and have new ones. And I would just say it's really helpful to approach this with the kind of openness and curiosity that we've been hearing from people sharing today. Just remember that it is a kind of lifelong learning process. We don't just have one experience of cultural difference and think, yes, that's great, I've got my cultural intelligence or my intercultural competence now. It is this continuous process of learning and reflection and communicating and building relationships. So I've just put a few definitions on the slides about the kind of skills and knowledge that we might develop. So some people call it cultural intelligence, some people call it intercultural competence. But really what a lot of people are talking about is this ability to navigate situations where not everybody's coming from the same cultural point of view, maybe not used to communicating in the same language, different contexts. And really what's important there is that self-awareness as a starting point, as well as like that openness to new things and a curious attitude towards difference. So just finally is to think about where those skills and attitudes might be helpful kind of in a workplace. So you might find yourself working interculturally in the future. I think it's helpful to think about what does that really mean for you. You might be working internationally, or you might work in a company that's got branches across the world. You might be working in a diverse team or with a diverse customer base. Maybe it means doing work that requires you to have an international perspective. But really, nowadays, it is quite difficult to imagine any kind of work or workplace where you wouldn't in some way have to come into contact with people who are different from you, or working with a diverse group of people. So the British Council did some interesting research. They did research with employers across different sectors in 9 countries, and it found that intercultural skills were as valued as highly as formal qualifications. And they actually identified significant risks in employing staff who didn't have those kind of intercultural skills. And so they really needed people who could work across cultural boundaries. And then these researchers also asked employers what intercultural skills were, and these are shown on the infographic on the slide. I'm sorry if it's a little bit difficult to read, but there is a link on the slide as well that you could follow. So that's things like understanding cultural difference, accepting cultural difference, your ability to adjust your communication, to build trust, to be flexible, to be multilingual, respectful, aware of your own culture and how your position kind of affects how you relate to others. Your ability to tolerate ambiguity, that's one of my favourite ones, where you're comfortable with the fact that things don't always make sense. Your ability to adapt to different cultures, to work in diverse teams, to be open to new ideas, to listen to and observe, and to be a continuous learner. So I think we won't think about this now, but as you go forward from today, I think it's good to think about what kind of workplaces you might be joining. What have you learned from your experiences so far? Who will you be working with, and how will intercultural skills help you and others? And so for my final point, I just wanted to think a bit more broadly about that as well. So it's not obviously it's helpful to think about the individual jobs that you might be doing and your personal kind of achievements, but also thinking about why intercultural skills are really important in the world today. You know, as the quote I've used on the slide, I really like this idea that we've got a global and very interconnected world. The problems that we're experiencing as humans are crossing borders, and they're not always culturally specific. So we need people who can cross the boundaries, who can cross cultures and communicate effectively and work with different people so that we can solve these big complex global problems. So I think it's really helpful to think about from the everyday small changes and new things that you encountered and the ways that you had to adapt your thinking and communicating to cope with those, right up to this big question about how you use that insight to go on this journey of continuous learning and making a difference. So that's my final question, is how has your experience helped you to develop cultural insights, and how might they be useful for you and for other people in the future? So you won't be able to answer that question in 2 or 3 minutes, but I hope it's something that you'll continue to think about for a long time. And I certainly know that I still think a lot about my long ago experience as an international student. I think it really helped me become who I am and think about the world in the way that I do. So I hope that you'll continue to find this experience meaningful for many years to come. So thanks for listening, and I'll hand over to Sean now, but if you've got any questions about my part of the presentation, I'll stay at the end and afterwards as well.
Hi, thanks, Jenna. Hi, just to introduce myself, so I'm Sean. I'm the student visa advice manager, so I run the immigration advice team here at the university. And just to state, if any of you, you have ongoing immigration issues, you have any questions, our door's always open to you. Please just email us anytime and let us know, and we're always happy to help you. I'm going to talk today about post-study visa options, but particularly one because it's the one that's probably going to be of the most interest to you at the moment. It's the new graduate immigration route, and I say new. It was introduced last year, in July last year, but I think you're one of the first kind of university cohorts who are going to have the opportunity to really benefit from this, because you can kind of plan your lives around the ability to actually apply for one of these and remain in the UK. I think the first thing I'd say is it's unlike any other UK immigration route. The requirements are incredibly straightforward to meet, and there's a reason for this. It was introduced after incredibly heavy pressure from the higher education sector and businesses in the UK, who essentially convinced the government that British food and British weather aren't enough to attract international students, and that we were actually losing them all to Australia, to Canada, to other countries, and international students would much rather go study in the US or study in Canada, primarily because there was no option for them to simply remain in the UK and look for work after they'd finished their studies. This has now changed. And so they've introduced a whole immigration route where British university graduates can literally remain in the UK for 2 years and look for a meaningful job, look for future opportunities, really kind of decide what they want to do with their lives without having to be tied down immediately to a specific employer. And this was what made the previous system very difficult. Graduates needed a job offer prior to actually applying for a visa to remain here. That's no longer the case. So I'm going to talk to you about the graduate visa, and I'll touch on the other ones for a short while afterwards. It's a 2-year visa, unless any of you have just completed a PhD program. So you can make an application and then remain in the UK for 2 years after it's granted. You don't need a specific employer at this stage. So if you're looking at applying during the summer after you graduate, you don't need to have a job offer. And any job you do take, it doesn't have to be at a specific skill level. It doesn't have to be a manager's position. It doesn't have to be at a particular salary, and it doesn't have to be at a particular educational level. You can take any job you want for 2 years if you're in the UK with a graduate visa. There's also none of the restrictions that apply to working on other visa types about how long you can work. So many of you will know as students, you can only work 20 hours during term time, things like that, full time during the holidays. There are no restrictions with the graduate visa. It's open-ended, and you can spend the 2 years really doing as you please, trying to find work. So the requirements, and I can't emphasize this enough, most immigration applications, there's a very short section on eligibility. What makes you eligible for this route? Are you an eligible candidate for this type of visa? And there's a much larger section of the rules related to suitability. Do you meet the financial requirements? Do you meet the English language requirements? Many of you know all this from your own student visa applications. You have to submit a lot of evidence, and you have to convince the Home Office that you're suitable for this visa. With the graduate immigration route, those two things are essentially one and the same. If you're eligible for it, you pretty much meet all the suitability criteria, with the exception of general grounds for refusal like criminality or things like that. But the only real requirement is that you have been awarded or will be awarded an eligible degree. Now, what does an eligible degree mean? It means a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, a PhD, not a PG diploma, which I'll come on to you in a bit. That's something that isn't eligible for the route. So you have to actually finish your full course essentially. But by and large, finishing with a master's degree or finishing with a degree, you can apply for the graduate route. That really is the only requirement that exists on it, with the exception of residency. So the first step in the process is you being awarded a degree. Finish your studies, do your exams, pass everything, get awarded the degree. Then the university will log on to the Home Office portal, the sponsor management system, and they'll report each student who's been awarded as being eligible for the graduate route. When that happens, an email is automatically sent to the student telling them you've been reported as eligible for the route. Please go ahead and make your application. You can't apply before you've been awarded your degree, unless something happens that means we have to report you prior to that, and that's something I'll come on to as well. But don't rush off and make applications for the graduate visa unless you're confident, or the university's told you essentially that you have been formally awarded. There is quite a long gap between students finishing their exams and actually being awarded their degree and graduation and things like that. The minute you finish your exams, don't just rush off to make an application, because it will be refused and you will lose your visa fees and everything else. So please wait until the university's told you. It must be done before your visas expire, and you must be within the UK. So this isn't something where you can go overseas and make an application like other routes. You have to apply from within the UK, and you have to do it while you are here as a student, with a capital S, a student visa holder. So any day up until the expiry of the visa, you can do this. So I'm assuming if you're all finishing in July, most of your visas will be expiring in November. You have until November to actually make an application under this new route. Once your student visa expires, that's it. You can't do it anymore, with one exception, and I'll come on to that later. The costs are fairly extensive. So it's £715 visa application fee, and you have to pay the immigration health surcharge as with student visas and everything else, which is 624 a year. So it is an expensive application, but as are all Home Office applications, they don't make it cheap. One thing to emphasize, the residency requirement. So if you've been essentially, they're expecting anyone who applies for this route to have been resident for 12 months in the UK, unless their academic course is shorter than that, in which case they need to have been resident in the UK for the whole course. Your particular cohort of students is going to be the only cohort where there's an exception to this. There's an exception for anyone who is doing remote study outside the UK up until the 30th of June. So up until the 30th of June, if you've been studying remotely on a university degree, you can still meet the residency requirements for the graduate route, provided you get back to the UK or provided you enter the UK in the first instance by the 30th of June. So there's two types of student. There's one who has been studying remotely and has never traveled to the UK. They've got a student visa, but they've never actually traveled to the UK at all because remote learning has still been permissible. You guys have to enter by the 30th of June, otherwise you cannot apply for the graduate route. You just won't be able to. If you've already entered the UK on your student visa, collected your BRP card, activated the visa, but have then gone home, you don't need to be back by the 30th of June for the graduate visa specifically. You may need to be back by the 30th of June because your course ends in September and you need to be studying over the summer and you can't do that remotely anymore. That's different. If you've already come in and activated your visa, you just need to get back before that visa expires so you can apply here to switch into the graduate route. Essentially, the long and short of it is you must have a valid student visa and be in the UK to switch into the route. There's no other way to do it. The process is just like any other in-country application, except it's simplified. They've made the process really simple for international students to switch into this route. They did not want to make it complicated at all. So biometrics are given. So many of you will have given biometrics overseas when you've gone to a UK visa application centre doing a student visa. The process is very similar here. There are pop-up centres run by a different company called UK VCAS, and you can book appointments with them to give your fingerprints and your biometrics as part of the visa application process. Some people will also be able to do this online using an app, and Home Office usually notify you if you're eligible to do that rather than visiting the centre. They'll simply reuse some details from your previous biometrics. But in those cases, so anyone who's got EU nationality, or in cases where you're told you can do the app, you can do the whole graduate visa process on your phone. Much simpler than actually applying overseas in some cases where you do have to go to a centre and everything. And the decision takes 8 weeks. So it's 8 weeks from the date the Home Office get your biometrics, not 8 weeks from the date you submit your application and pay your fee. The Home Office, the minute they get your fingerprints and everything, they'll start processing it, and they'll allow 8 weeks from that date. Next one here, sorry, bear with me. So things to remember about the graduate route is quite important. You can only apply for this once. So you can't make an application for a graduate visa, stay in the UK for a few months, leave the UK and then come back. It's a one-stop shop essentially. You could only make this application once. So if you want to do it, do it. But you can't study significant courses whilst in the UK under a graduate visa. So for example, if you got the graduate route and then decided in September of 23 you wanted to pursue a master's degree, you'd have to give up your graduate visa and switch back into the student route. You can't study at that level on a graduate visa. You can do vocational classes, evening classes, things that wouldn't be eligible for a CAS. It's courses where the university can't sponsor you for them anyway because they're too short or they don't have a qualification attached to them or something like that. You can do those while you're here under a graduate visa, but you can't just chop and change between working and studying full time. You have to basically give up your graduate visa and you can't apply for it again. It's non-extendable, so it's a 2-year visa to find a job. Essentially, it's a 2-year visa to either find a job or decide on further study and switch back into the student route, but you can't extend it. So it really is, you get 2 years and that's it. 3 years if you've done the PhD. I touched on this earlier, but if you graduate with a diploma, a PG diploma, rather than a full master's degree or something equivalent to that, it's not eligible for the route. There's a list of qualifications they deem eligible, and it really means just graduating with your full degree. Some of you may be aware of the exceptional assurance scheme. So the UKVI, if they put in place a mechanism for people whose travel was so heavily disrupted by the pandemic, they're not able to leave the UK before their visas expire. You can apply for something called exceptional assurance, and it essentially just extends your visa. If you find yourself in a situation where you haven't been able to apply for the graduate route yet, but your student visa's expired, you can apply for exceptional insurance to protect you from overstaying your visa, to protect you from any consequences of that. But if that's granted to you, you can also then switch into the graduate route. So it's the one exception. Everybody has to have a valid student visa at the point of application, unless you've been granted exceptional assurance under this arrangement. And it's particularly important for students whose homes are in mainland China at the moment, because the travel is so disruptive. And that's where we're seeing most of these sorts of applications come, because it's impossible to get flights back to China. You don't need a new CAS number for the graduate visa. It's one of those things, if we had a nickel for every student who asked us for a new CAS number for the graduate visa, you don't. It's based on the CAS that you were issued when you applied to come study at university the first time, when you first joined your particular course that you're studying. They'll ask you for a CAS number in the application. It's the CAS number that was issued to you right when you started your degree. That's the one they're after. They don't need a new one for it. If there's a delay with your award, and this sometimes happens, students are resitting, or their marks may need to go for investigation in some way, and their visa is going to expire before they've actually been formally awarded, please contact us. The university won't automatically report you unless your award status formally changes, unless you're formally awarded. What we can do in case-by-case basis is look at whether you are extremely likely to complete your degree. So if the investigations have finished and you're just waiting on external examiners and things like that, we can look at that and we can report you on the basis that you will be awarded a degree. But it's only for those who know that their student visas are going to expire before external examiners can meet and they're actually awarded and things like that. But do get in touch if you're really concerned about it. Do get in touch, just particularly as it's coming down to the expiry date. And just one thing to also mention: dependents, spouses and children can apply under this route. So if you are in the UK with family members, they can make applications at the same time as you to switch from being dependents of a student visa to dependents of a graduate visa. That's perfectly fine. And so I've taken most of my time with the graduate visa because it's something that benefits a lot of international students at the moment. It's something, if you seek to remain here, or if you think you might want to take advantage of the UK job market in the next 2 years at any point, it's worth applying for a graduate visa now and then before going home, really. I mean, you can leave the UK and come back. So you could leave the UK for the summer, come back in September and apply for the graduate visa. If you have 8 weeks where you plan to be here, I'd suggest just getting it done, because then you've got it for the next 2 years. You can use it. You can come back and look for work as you please. If you don't, and you leave the UK before your student visa, after your student visa, sorry, if you leave the UK and haven't applied under the graduate route and your student visa is expired, one of your options then is the skilled worker route. So the skilled worker, it's the mammoth of employment immigration. It's a huge part of British immigration, and it's what drives a lot of the Home Office's work, actually. This is how people sponsor employees. So people sponsor workers to come to the UK or to remain in the UK and work in jobs. It's very, 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 very different to the graduate route. The requirements are so extensive that I can't even talk about them here. There simply isn't the time, and the simple variety, the massive variety of requirements based on your circumstances, who your job offer is with, you know, where you studied, everything. It's too much detail to go in, really. But what I would say is you can switch from being a student visa holder into the skilled worker route if you have a job offer from a company that has a particular license. If they've got a skilled worker license, the university has a student license, workplace sponsors have a skilled worker license. They'll assign you a COS, which is basically the exact same thing as a CAS. It just has a lot of different information on it, and it's issued in a very different way. The costs for issuing these are very extensive for employers. It's not quite as simple as with the university issuing a CAS statement. The university has to do checks for that, but a COS is a different sort of beast. If you're applying from outside the UK, they have to actually ask the Home Office for permission on a case-by-case basis to issue a COS, and there's a lot of checks and things that go along with it. One key thing to understand is that the skilled worker route is entirely linked to one particular job with one particular company. So it's not something where you can just get a skilled worker visa and then go work wherever you like. That company sponsors you to be in the UK. You have to do that job with that firm. And any changes to employment, you have to get new sponsorship and a new visa. So it's much more rigid than the graduate route is the point. But you know, companies may want you to switch into it. One benefit of it, as opposed to the graduate route, is that it does contribute towards settlement. So it is the time you spend in the UK as a skilled worker under this immigration route, you can contribute that later on towards your eligibility for indefinite leave to remain or even British citizenship further down the road. Getting a skilled worker route visa is often many people's first steps to becoming a British citizen, because they work for 5 years, then they change to other categories. And then eventually they can apply for naturalization as being British. The graduate route doesn't offer that. Those 2 years don't count towards it at all. So as I said, you can apply from outside the UK or within the UK. If within the UK, you want to do it before your student visa expires. You can't come in as a visitor and then switch into the skilled worker. You've got to do it really switching from student to skilled worker. And the costs aren't wildly different, but it is expensive. It's another expensive visa. Companies will usually issue them for 3 years or for 5 years. The 5-year one is more expensive. And as I talked about earlier, I'm not really going to go into the way the points are allocated or the actual requirements for the route, because it is far too complicated for us to really touch on today. If you're getting copies of these, the skilled worker guidance is available online, including the actual immigration rules if you want to go really into it. But that's where that would be a good starting place. UKISA also have excellent pages about what's required for these sort of routes. But as I said, any company that's employing you will lead on that process. If they think you're going to need a skilled worker visa, they're the ones who will do the checks, and their HR departments are the ones who will actually lead, because they get punished by the Home Office if they don't do it properly. So yeah, and that's the skilled worker route. One thing that people don't know much about are the former Tier 5 routes, the temporary worker routes. These are also an option available to you if you're looking at taking very specific roles. So temporary worker visas are usually issued for about 2 years, and they're again similar to the skilled worker route. They're sponsored, but they're a way into different types of work in the UK. Really, they're used for internships and roles with particular organizations. So sports organizations, professional sports people come in under these routes. People wanting to work with charities who are often unpaid, but they're doing voluntary work, they do it under these routes. One of the more interesting ones is the government approved exchange scheme, actually, which I'll jump to now. This is something I'd encourage you to check out. So if you want to do an internship, it can be a paid internship in the UK. If you've got anything like that lined up, you can do it under the government approved exchange route, which used to be called Tier 5 route. If you go on the list of programs, there's actually a rather fascinating list of all these different companies that offer employment internship style placements for international applicants, and they sponsor them directly under this scheme. One example that comes to the top of my head, Fulbright, the US UK exchange, they have the ability to sponsor under this, and so do a lot of other companies doing scientific research that involves industry internships and things like that. Some companies like Access Tier 5 will actually just act as the sponsor for other companies. So they have the ability to issue COS, Tier 5 GAE COS, essentially, for a company providing an internship to you in any field at all. You know, it could be working in aerospace or chemicals, whatever it is. Access Tier 5 is a company where they act as your sponsor for an internship. So if that's something, if you do go home and you miss the chance for the graduate route, you could look at coming back in under Tier 5, under the government approved exchange, if the job you're doing doesn't meet the salary thresholds or something for a skilled worker visa. It's a bit more of a niche category that people often overlook. And the other one is the youth mobility visa. There may not be anyone on today from any of these countries, but if you are, there is a visa that is similar to the graduate route in a way, that it allows you 2 years to essentially come to the UK and not do as you please, but there's no specific employment requirements and there's no specific study requirement. The idea is it's encouraging people from these countries to simply come and live here for 2 years, come and work here, come and explore. So you could make applications under this route if you're from one of these countries and you're between 18 and 30 at the time. With the 4 that I've starred there, there's a very specific kind of quota system that I believe is done through national governments. So I think you have to contact say for Hong Kong, for example, you have to contact the authorities in Hong Kong to go on the ballot for Tier 5 youth mobility visas, and then you become eligible to apply one through them. But it's just, again, it's a visa route that's often overlooked by people, so something to remember. The only other thing that it came into my head this morning, actually, the University of Leeds has something called Spark, which is an entity that provides support for people setting up businesses, and there's even the ability to sponsor visas through that. They're called startup visas, and so that's if you have a business idea and you want to remain in the UK, you could look to do things through them, and they could take your business proposal. I mean, they could see if it meets many requirements, and then sponsor you for a visa on those terms, which is different to everything I talked about today. But I just didn't want to miss that off. And with that, thank you. Any questions at all?
Yep. Hi, Sean. So we have a few questions.
Okay.
I start up with the from the start. So first one is if the students could have a copy of the slides after the presentation.
Yeah.
So I think they can get that.
Yeah,
the second one would be, what if I went back home during the course time and came back? Would I still be eligible for the graduate route visa?
Yeah. So if you've arrived in the UK and you've used your vignette and you've got your BRP card and everything and you've been studying here, you can leave and come back. As long as you're here before your visa expires, you can make an application to switch into the graduate route. You have to be in the UK and your visa has to be valid. But those are the 2 requirements. So yes, it's not a problem that you've already been and gone. The only thing I'd caution about is if you're trying to come back into the UK just before your visa expires, so within a week or 2 of your visa expiring, just to apply for this route, you may need to convince an immigration officer that you do actually intend to apply. Like having a drafted application form and having the paperwork ready and stuff would be a start, but I wouldn't leave it that late if possible. Get it done, commit to 8 weeks in the UK and get the visa sorted.
On to the next one. So if I'm attending a master's degree, I cannot apply to the graduate route after finishing it?
You have to have been awarded. So if you're doing a master's degree, that normally means you finish in September and your visas expire in January. So your course end is in September though, so you should be awarded fairly shortly after that. If you're going through resits or there's something about it that's going to be delayed beyond your visa expiry date in January, as I said, contact us and let us know, and we might be able to report you based on you being highly likely to complete. But yeah, you've got to wait for your visa to be awarded. Your degree to be awarded. That's the trigger for being able to apply.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, for how long should the passport be valid while applying for the graduate route visa?
Technically, it only has to be valid on the date you apply. when you apply within the UK, your passport only has to be valid on the date of application, which is the date your visa fee is paid. Of course, if that's the case, if your passport expires right after you apply, you won't be able to travel anywhere. You'll be stuck here, but that's a different matter. But yeah, when applying within the UK, that's the only validity requirement, that it's valid at the point of application. Technically, it could expire the day after you paid the visa fee.
Thank you. Right. We have like three more.
Okay.
Quickly say them out. Can international master student work for more than 20 hours after term time, or is dissertation period also counted in the term time?
Yes, it is term time. Yeah, and with master students who the whole summer period is considered term time, so it's a 20-hour restriction up until the end of the. If it's the course end date on your CAS that's relevant, usually I think these are about the 30th of September. Anything after that you can work full time, but until then it's term time rules, 20 hours.
That's good. Can PSW visa holders leave UK when they are during the PSW? Okay, can PSW visa holders leave the UK when they are under their graduate visa period?
Yes. So once the visa is granted, you can leave the UK and come back whenever you like within the 2-year validity. That's fine. What you can't do is apply and leave the UK while the Home Office are making a decision. You have to wait for it to be granted. If you leave the country during the processing, it invalidates the application.
Thank you. I think this is the last one. How long before the student visa ends should the application for graduate visa be made? I think like it's kind of on the same lines that you addressed.
Yeah, you can do it any day up until the visa expires. So if your student in visa expired, for example, today, you could apply today if you're eligible. What you don't really want to do is leave it that long. I mean, there's no. You can do it from the moment you get awarded. So if your courses are finishing now, you're probably most likely, and I can't speak for the whole university on this behalf, but your award date's probably going to be in July at some point, unless there's any delay to that. So really, it's any time after being awarded before the visa expires. That's your window for doing this. But yeah, the 8-week processing can take place after the visa expires. It's just you've got to apply online beforehand, otherwise you won't get it.
Yeah, I think there's just one more that has popped in.
Sure.
Is 8 weeks an ideal time for students to apply for PSW before their student visa expires?
Well, it takes 8 weeks for the Home Office to process it. I can't give you. I know people like the idea of an ideal time. I'm afraid there is. I can't. I can't really say what the best time is. So that you must just do it before your visa expires. If you wanted to show an abundance of caution, you could maybe allow yourself more than 8 weeks, because if the application was refused, you'd still have a week left on your student visa. But they're not likely to be refused as long as you've been reported as eligible. So.
Thank you, Jenna and Sean, for such an insightful session, and we really appreciate you taking time out to conduct this session. So, for all the students who are here right now, if there are any more questions, please feel free to book like a one-on-one with our career centers consultants, or drop in by the career center to meet one of us. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you and all the best.
Thank you so much.